This week, it's the turn of the tide. But first, I'm Quinn Emmett, and this is Important, Not Important. It's science for people who give a shit. My goal, as always, is to help you answer the question, what can I do? Hit subscribe right now to get this essay and my conversations with the world's smartest people every single week. You can find the email version and links to everything at importantnotimportant.com or right in your show notes or the description on YouTube or whatever. And now let's answer today's big question. Are we at the turn of the tide? The late John Lewis called your right to vote precious, almost sacred, the most powerful nonviolent tool or instrument in a democratic society. Since Selma, since the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Acts, since Shelby County, voting rights have expanded and then been massively restricted all over again. In Wisconsin and Alabama just last year, Republicans fought to preserve power despite state Supreme Court rulings and against the clear sentiment of voters, exercised despite illegal gerrymanders, threats of violence, and more. Across America these last 5-6 years, despite a growing population, nearly 2,000 polling places have been closed amid hundreds of new anti-voting laws and even more bills. With all this and everything else, it can understandably feel like the power structures of old will never, ever stop trying to take away your sacred voice and to take away your vote. And to be clear, they are trying to take your voice away from you. And despite decades of bullshit about small government and family values, your voice and your vote are only the first of many human rights they're actively working to take away from you. Of course, many of you already know this. They never, ever wanted you to have a voice in the first place. But through centuries of compound action, as we call it, across millions of people, new voices were incrementally, reluctantly allowed. New votes were cast and counted, and new faces and perspectives entered the halls of power. Not that the kinds of people who forbade them in the first place ever give up. Oh, fuck no, they don't give up. Their tenacity, their seemingly inexhaustible resources, and penchant for just, whisking Supreme Court justices wherever the fuck they want to go. Oh, and also their hate. Well, it all makes it easy to wonder if we'll ever win, actually win. If we can ever even take a breath or a year or an election off. If their insidious tactics, outright corruption, all-consuming sexism, racism, and militant theism make defeat inevitable. It's a fair question. But before we answer it, let's get some perspective. Let's get some elves involved. Now, this may surprise you because I am a fucking dork, but I don't necessarily believe in Tolkien's long defeat theory. Oh, you haven't heard of it? Because you're a mature, functioning adult? That's fine. That's great for you. But you signed up for this, so let's talk about it anyways, because, and I promise, it's actually relevant to how you're feeling right now about them stripping you for parts. The long defeat theory specifically converts to MLK's famous long arc bending towards justice, says that history is a long decline from perfection to a state of destruction, when the forces of good win only occasional and incomplete victories against those of evil. Boy, does that sound timely. And now that's just one fellow nerd's interpretation, but read this from J.R.R. Tolkien's own letters. I am a Christian, and indeed a Roman Catholic, so that I do not expect history to be anything but a long defeat, though it contains, and in a legend may contain more clearly and movingly, some samples or glimpses of final victory. Now look, I am not on the friendliest terms with Catholicism, and perhaps more impactfully, unlike Tolkien, I didn't serve at all, anytime, anywhere, much less lose most of my friends in the trenches of World War I either. So, yeah, fair game, man. Like so many who've served in whatever age or era, but especially then, Tolkien never really overcame his experiences and grief. He claimed Middle-earth's fictional battles weren't directly inspired by some, but then got shit for his stories not being realistic enough. Fucking critics, man. But I've read them a million times, and they're pretty popular, and they sure as hell feel eerily and tragically derived from the Great War. That's the easy answer. right? A war so horrific that people said another war would never be fought. A war with both bayonets and horses and the first tanks, when penicillin was at least 10 years away. Even C.S. Lewis, another literary legend who loved wardrobes, a World War I vet and fellow Christian who is no stranger to allegory, he reviewed Tolkien's main Lord of the Rings series this way. This war has the very quality of the war my generation knew. It is all here, the endless, unintelligible movement, the sinister quiet of the front when everything is now ready, the flying civilians, the lively, vivid friendships, the background of something like despair in the merry foreground, and such heaven-sent windfalls as a cache of tobacco salvaged from a ruin. So, yeah, man, Tolkien understandably buried himself in his work in the years to follow, in his worlds. He revealed his jaded intentions through maps and endless prose. His fictional world, like ours, would have bright spots, but the forces of evil were just too many. They would outlast us. They would turn us against each other, and yes, strip us for all we hold dear. Our last levers of autonomy, agency, and the power that comes from those. So perhaps Tolkien's journey, his specific perspective, then is closest to that of the the half-elf Lord of Rivendell, Elrond. Tolkien, as we have discussed, was traumatized by World War I, a war with uncountable costs that basically ended in stalemate and armistice. That would be enough. But here's the thing, and that's why I said this is the easy answer. It's actually what happened after World War I, after peace was salvaged on the backs of a generation of young people sent to death, that most inspired his legendary collection, again, The Lord of the Rings. Because for 20 years following the November 11th armistice, Tolkien bore witness to peace, yes, but it was brief. Soon after came again Germany, the rise of Hitler in the Third Reich, and yet another world war, one where his sons were on the front lines. Tens of millions of additional lives were lost all over again, from Stalingrad to Bastogne to Okinawa. Eventually the Nazis fell, but only after an all-out, unheard of effort from the last great alliance, most of whom are now lost to time. And this is a timeline that neatly mirrors the writing, publishing, and backstory to the Fellowship of the Ring. Now, none of this is rocket science. Many nerds before me have discussed it ad nauseum. I'm just doing a poor job for you comparing it to voting rights and bodily autonomy and democracy, or I will in just a second. Anyways, Elrond, the healer, also a vet of the last alliance of men and elves, spent a few thousand years recovering in basically the Montecito of Middle-earth. Tolkien takes care and time to describe Elrond's own PTSD. The details are scattered across the famous big books, and also a bunch of tiny poems I have multiple copies of. But in the Fellowship of the Ring, Elrond summarized the prospects for the future fellowship. He said, "I have seen 3 ages in the west of the world, and many defeats and many fruitless victories." And then later, ruminating more fully on Middle-earth's own arc towards justice, he said, "Fruitless did I call the victory of the last alliance? Not wholly so. Yet it did not achieve its end. Sauron was diminished, but not destroyed. His ring was lost, but not unmade. The Dark Tower was broken, but its foundations were not removed, for they were made with the power of the ring, and while it remains, they will endure." And to be honest, this sounds a lot like Europe in 1920 to 1938. And it sure feels a lot like social media and Apple News and Supreme Court verdicts and Democratic fundraising texts since 2016. 12 steps forward, 42 steps back, same bad guys. Anyways, good luck, hobbits, no pressure. What I think Elrond was saying, and what I think Tolkien was trying to say was, from everything I can tell, job's never done. From Europe to Rivendell, evil just never stops stopping. It is exhausting. It is demoralizing. And so the odds were stacked against the Fellowship from the start, by Tolkien himself, by his hand. Of course, they persevered. But long before that, it required a hobbit stepping up amid a chaotic secret council soaked in bitter infighting and dick measuring to say, fuck it, I'll do it. Only then did everyone else step up and sacrifice everything. And it still almost didn't work. And whether you love the books or know them or dislike them, the climactic turns at the end of the Return of the King are telling. In the end, at the culmination of 3 long ages of gods and elves and men, after 6 months of travel and torment, his dearest friends and thousands of their often reluctant allies just sacrificing themselves as decoys at the Black Gate, enormous losses masking his secret entrance into Mount Doom, that hobbit, the ring-bearer, Frodo, finally failed. He failed. He failed despite powerful, timely gifts from Galadriel, and despite Boromir's tragic, selfless fight against a phalanx of orcs, among other timely cheat codes, like Gandalf the White. The ring was too strong. Darkness prevailed. As advertised. Frodo failed when his legs gave out, and perhaps inevitably, if you subscribe to the long defeat theory, until Sam put him on his goddamn back. And he failed again when Gollum, whose Frodo had previously spared because he's a way better person than I will ever be, gave it one last attempt to take back his precious at all costs. If you give him an inch, they take a fucking mile. Frodo's grace blew up in his face, the long defeat nearly complete, twice over. But here's the twist. Gollum got the One Ring, but he also paid the costs all the way down into the fire, which consumed the ring too. Gollum inadvertently saved the day, for now, in what Tolkien described in his letters later as a sudden eucatastrophe. Here's what Tolkien, who was an orphan, wrote. The consolation of fairy stories, the joy of the happy ending, or more correctly out of the good catastrophe, the sudden joyous turn, for there is no true end to any fairy tale. This joy, which is one of the things which fairy stories can produce supremely well, is not essentially escapist or fugitive. In its fairy tale, or otherworld setting, it is a sudden and miraculous grace, never to be counted on to recur. It does not deny the existence of discatastrophe, of sorrow and failure. The possibility of these is necessary to the joy of deliverance. It denies, in the face of much evidence, if you will, universal final defeat, and insofar is Evangelium, giving a fleeting glimpse of joy, joy beyond the walls of the world, poignant as grief. It is the mark of a good fairy story, of the higher or more complete kind, that however wild its events, however fantastic or terrible the adventures, it can give to child or man that hears it, when the turn comes, a catch of the breath, a beat and lifting of the heart, near to, or indeed accompanied by, tears, as keen as that given by any form of literary art and having a peculiar quality. It produces a peculiar effect because it is a sudden glimpse of truth. Your whole nature, chained in material cause and effect, the chain of death, feels a sudden relief as if a major limb out of joint had suddenly snapped back. Now, a less poetic version of his eucatastrophe is like a deus ex machina. Random shit happens to save the day, etc., but when I originally wrote this, the Writers Guild was on strike, so you're welcome. Anyways, think about that for a sec. A sudden relief as if a major limb out of joint had suddenly snapped back. That's a complicated metaphor to try and apply to America, a wonderful country where the promise of equal rights and real democracy remains steadfastly unfulfilled because of people who don't want it to be. Was America's out-of-joint limb really ever in place? Now look, like any great challenge with enormous stakes, the road is not straight. Not for Frodo, not for deforestation, for HIV, malaria, clean energy, clean water, clean air, for democracy, for voting rights. This country has helped lift billions out of poverty. It is capable of great and horrible tasks. There are wins and devastating setbacks and cancers that refuse to stay in remission. Now, whether you attribute this wisdom to Batman's dad or Rocky or some real person. The key is what happens when we inevitably get knocked down. I do believe in the inevitably part. The key is that we get back up again, over and over again. However long it takes, however many generations it takes, however many times we have to crawl back up off the mat. And there's great news here. In reality, in modern times, there are some real-world eucatastrophical type reversals of late that simply wouldn't exist without what we call compound action, without your hard-earned vote. Senators Schumer's and Manchin secretly reviving what became the ARA, an imperfect, enormous renovation of American industry with the goal to electrify everything and maybe save some Medicare participants some hard-earned money too. Second, mRNA vaccines becoming available to the vulnerable public years before traditional vaccines might have, because everyone in the world needed one and because of decades of prior work to make them effective and safe. Blue waves in 2018 and 2020, including Georgia, that kept Trump from ever becoming fully operational and eventually voting him out altogether, only to come back now. But expanding Democratic representation in the Senate in 2022, while, of course, losing the House. New progressive groups hell-bent on recruiting, training, and running progressive candidates down the ballot where it matters most, fueling unexpected gains across the states in 2022, 2023. Here's where it all comes together. I may not agree that the long defeat is real, but I do agree that bad guys are real, that each of our time here is short, and that the work is never done. And, finally, that we can only do it together. But that if we do, we can fucking win. America only continues to hold promise because generations of people before us looked at evil and the odds and said, fuck that. Because generations of people came here to not only have better, but to make it better with their own bare hands. To lead the largest and most profitable companies that have ever existed. To invent new drugs for terrible diseases. To see us for what we are and what we can be. Now, I agree that heroic journeys cannot be undertaken alone. Not successful ones, at least. None of these progressive groups are going to get it done without a bunch of checks, right? I empathize with the very rational feeling that one small person cannot change a huge world. The powers that be want you to feel that way. These people are fucking obsessed with you feeling impotent and trapped and less than. I have this huge, increasingly powerful platform, all of you, and still often feel like it's all futile. I didn't fight in World War I or any war. I have never had my voice or my vote taken away. I am acutely aware, though, of how grief can change us and how it can feel inescapable even as time passes. I've suffered grief on a personal level. I'm not super interested in revisiting at the moment, but I'm old, and self-aware enough to have long acknowledged that loss is all around us and it is inevitable. Loss is what reminds us of the stakes, of the ticking clock. It is what prods us to procreate and galvanizes to fight for air and water and an education and the right to vote. Here's a quote for you. The vote is the most powerful instrument ever devised by human beings for breaking down injustice and destroying the terrible walls which imprison people because they are different from others. Lyndon B. Johnson. Fear of catastrophic loss and dark power is what turned out millions of polls in the recent election, what brought Brazil back from the brink and might salvage some form of democracy in France, what ended finally 15 years of conservative rule in the UK, and if necessary, may help America keep her head afloat in the coming months as we try to run it blue again. But they don't actually want you to do any of that, especially this November. They definitely don't want women or black people to vote or for former prisoners to do that, nor do they want to reform or do away with the Electoral College or admit Washington, D.C. or anywhere else as a state. That's the equivalent of just tossing the ring right into the fire. Game over. They don't do that. They're bad guys. In another essay called What It All Means, I wrote this. Imagine for a brief moment if your country had the highest maternal mortality rate among developed countries, but one half of your country's elected representatives claimed to be pro-life and wanted to make X country great again. So they voted consistently and proudly against baseline policies that supported pregnant people, parents, and children, all in the name of tax cuts for the wealthy, who require more or less none of those policies to survive. In fact, they went further than voting against good policies. They've sought and often succeeded to eliminate past good policies while writing new bad ones that deprive even more pregnant people of health care, forcing them to have babies even if they were forcibly impregnated or the baby is no longer alive, and then to be on the hook for providing them with life essentials. They have deprived local health departments and water utilities of the resources to evolve beyond fax machines and lead pipes because government spending is evil. They gerrymander districts through a variety of measures to achieve a simple outcome. So black people cannot vote. From Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. She said, the Census Bureau counts imprisoned individuals as residents of the jurisdiction in which they are incarcerated. Because most new prison construction occurs in predominantly white rural areas, white communities benefit from inflated population totals at the expense of the urban, overwhelmingly minority communities from which the prisoners come. So yeah, these culprits, or bad guys, design the systems that got us here and seek to design more, so I think we should both litigate the past and be hellbent on imagining a better today and tomorrow. That's what I wrote. And again, the receipts are in. From the Center for Public Integrity, a type of law first created after the end of slavery to prohibit black men from voting prevented more than 4.6 million Americans from participating in the 2022 midterm elections. 4.6 million. 48 states strip voting rights from people convicted of felonies, no small decision in the country with the highest incarceration rate in the world. A third of those affected, despite representing less than 15% of the population, are black. So yeah, we are going to have to keep recruiting new candidates, keep campaigning for them, keep funding them, keep electing them, keep marching, and keep fighting for more people, for everyone to be able to vote, especially, once again, forever, in November. But while and after we do that, we can and we have to make elections themselves much, much better. Automatic voter registration, universal early voting, rights restored, voting by mail, drop boxes everywhere. You get it. We can't lose 2,000 polling places. We have to add 5,000. We can choose to do this to protect your vote, to make it easier to vote. For decades, Congress actually did exactly that over and over again. In a more serious country, ranked choice voting would be adopted everywhere. Now, idealism may sometimes be the enemy of progress. And in this case, we just have to fucking win. Up and down, especially down the ballot. Because none of the actions we promote here, no one office is a silver bullet. The IRA was among the biggest things we humans have ever done, but the project isn't done. The legislation was very imperfect. And we've already learned a lot from trying to implement, for example, the electrification credits 50 different ways. But we do have to walk and chew gum at the same time, and then keep walking and chewing and never stop stopping, like them. Because yeah, look, ranked choice is fucking rad, no doubt. But when there are huge power structures, the legacy of slavery and the Jim Crow past still fighting every single day to take away your ability to vote at all, often by literally removing places where you can vote or drop your ballot, it doesn't matter if we're talking about ranked choice, a fistful of straws, or a fucking sorting hat, your vote won't count because you don't get to cast it. And if you don't get to cast it, this place doesn't get better. Because sometimes they suppress your vote in subtle ways, and in others, not so much. So we have to think more comprehensively from the bottom up. We don't do gatekeeping here between individual, systemic, all that shit. Just the opposite. We got to do it all. Let's briefly discuss the gerontocracy. We have the oldest elected legislature among developed countries, full stop. The moderate centrist gerontocracy machine, who were born and raised amid a drastically different world than the one we live in now, who are terrified of losing their seats, but especially to people who don't look like them, aka people who have had hourly jobs, student and credit debt they've never had, who've suffered through air pollution and flooding and foreclosures they couldn't dream of, who have failed to find or even afford childcare, who worked in childcare or elderly care until they couldn't afford to do the work anymore. As my friend Amanda Littman of Run for Something said recently, the problem with the gerontocracy is not that any one leader is too old. It's that we have a system that privileges and protects old leaders at the expense of bringing new perspectives to the table. And look, I love a good, productive, right-sized government at every level. I love paying taxes and knowing a nearby bridge won't collapse because I did, that the ambulance will come if we need it. But what the current occupants do is they fire up these machines, fueled by vast wealth and their incumbent power, to maintain the status quo, to support other incumbents, no matter how old or toothless, to marginalize young progressive candidates who intimately understand and live the issues and who give a shit. All in the name of you just not turning out. That's right. The recipe is often simply and successfully demoralization. On the other hand, good news. Bad guys are still real. As David Brooks wrote, as long as Trump is leading it, the Republican Party cannot be reformed. It can only be deprived of power. Look, as the last few elections have proved, having an honest-to-goodness bad guy on one ticket can definitely improve turnout. It's easy to lean on the bad guy thing again. But my point is this. If we want eucatastrophe, we're going to have to make it happen, to campaign on hope and progress and making people's fucking lives better, no matter the candidate, by driving power from below where people can touch and feel it. And there's great news there. This is all a fellowship. You're not alone. No one's asking you to be Frodo and carry the ring to Mordor alone, or even with your best bud Sam. They didn't do it alone. Neither did Katniss or Furiosa, or Atalanta or Rey. They all had people eventually, to an extent. And man, we've got people. Millions before us, and so many, if we get this right one more time, to come after us. 7 generations beyond us. And there are a variety of amazing groups working right now to turn this ship around, census by census, district by district, candidate by candidate, vote by vote, election by election, and they need your help. They want you to be able to vote, and then they want you to actually vote. There are nonpartisan voting rights groups, and there are get out the vote groups, and they need your help. I've always loved this quote from Plato. One of the penalties for refusing to participate in politics is that you end up being governed by your inferiors. Yeah. There are groups like our friends at the Environmental Voter Project focused solely on getting out environmental voters, regardless of candidate or party or office. There are groups like, again, our friends at Run for Something, who exclusively recruit and support local and state-level progressive candidates under 40. And groups like Headcount, who register people to vote at concerts, which must be fun. There are new organizations like Voters of Tomorrow, by Gen Z, for Gen Z. There are other new organizations like Third Act, by voters over 60, for voters over 60. There are long-term organizations like the ACLU, League of Women Voters, Fair Fight, the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, Democracy Works, and more, and even more. Groups with short-term PACs that support a dynamic slate of candidates like Climate Cabinet, Swing Left, and all the other ones. And before you get too caught up in it, I want to quickly reiterate our mandate here. We are biased, not towards any particular party, person, or company. Instead, we often and specifically call out both good actors and bad actors who are measurably working towards or preventing progress at every single level of power. Yeah, man, your fears have always been well placed. They don't want you to vote. They certainly don't want you to run. They do not want you to have power with your art, your wallet, your vote, or with a gavel. They don't want you to have health care, to be able to afford what they can, to have autonomy and agency over your body. They do not want you to even feel comfortable in your own fucking body, to read books about our messy history. They do not want you to have time off. They do not want separation of church and state. They don't mind fascism if it benefits them. They do not want more or any immigrants, despite a profound lack of understanding how immigrants provide everything we rely on with so few protections. And, I mean, Project 2025 goes far beyond all this. I'm going to paraphrase the right here. If they want our books and our voting rights and our uteri, our social contracts and public spaces, if they want Medicaid and everyone on it to die, if they want to do away with clean air and clean water, to cancel gay marriage and civil rights, well, they can come and fucking get them. Meet us at the ballot box. We have to fight with our wallets, our feet, our voice, and our votes. Again, inevitably, for every single candidate in every single election from the bottom up. Little wins down ballot add up into big wins, which builds long-term power. That is compound action. Understanding who, what money, and what policies are driving progress or standing in the way are key to actually bending the arc further and faster for more people and to avoid the long defeat forever. Let's go march on Mordor. That's it for this week. If you've got feedback, questions, opinions, want to talk about Tolkien, email them to me at questions@importantnotimportant. To go deeper, visit importantnotimportant.com. Thank you for giving a shit.